Good morning and welcome to the latest in the series, the last of the year of the GSA Snapshot Webinars. Today we'll be taking a look at the global data behind the 5G headlines. During these 30-minute sessions, we dig into a topic of interest to the global mobile ecosystem, drawing on the depth and breadth of GSA research to provide invaluable and unique insights into the current state of 4G and 5G networks, technologies, spectrum and devices globally. But first, just a little bit of housekeeping before we dive into today's snapshot. We're joined by Joe Barrett, President of GSA, and Simon Sherrington, GSA's Vice President of Research. There will be an opportunity to ask questions. Please use the Q&A function, the chat function on the sidebar. Pose your questions as we go through the data and the insights, and then we can put them to Joe and Simon at the end of the session. We'll also be doing a bit of a live demo of the new Gambods database as well, so we'll actually be able to interrogate the data a little bit more. The data presented today, including all the presentation slides, will be available on the website and will be shared with you immediately after this event in an email. You get a link to the PDF and a link to the recording. You can also download the slides direct from the website now. Today's snapshot webinar is looking at a 2021 review on 5G spectrum networks and devices. The agenda and the focus points you can see on the screen. To get things started, I'll first hand over to Joe Barrett, President of GSA, who will share just a brief update on the GSA's activities and momentum in 2021.
Thank you, Richard. I did see a quick message that some people can't hear sound, so I apologise for that if some people are having problems. But all the slides will be available on the website. I just wanted to thank everybody for all their support and all the hard work over the past year. As we go into 2022, it's been an interesting couple of years for everybody, I think, and especially for our industry. But despite that, we've seen exceptional growth in 5G, but also in activity and people coming to GSA to get access to information to help their businesses and help them understand what is actually happening in the industry. We've got people coming to the website from over 200 countries. We are delivering over 200 reports and presentations annually. Many of those free to download once registered. We've now got multiple devices on over 20,000 in our database for 4G, over 1,000 devices for 5G. And we're tracking spectrum and what is happening, especially for 5G spectrum around the world. We've also been very pleased to welcome Apple to our executive board this year, and a number of new members, including InterDigital, Radisys, Keysight. So I think GSA is definitely becoming the voice of the suppliers and the ecosystem in the industry more and more. So I'm very pleased. I wish everybody a happy holidays going into the next few weeks. And let's get straight to have a look at the data that we've been collecting for the past year. Over to Simon.
Thank you, Joe. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining this session. As announced, I'm Simon Sherrington, and I lead the GSA's research activity. And as we come to the end of what's been another memorable year in many respects, we thought it would be a good time to look at what's happened in the 5G world, a world which has continued to transform dramatically during 2021 with an end-of-year roundup. I'll be drawing on information and statistics drawn from a wide range of GSA's reports and databases, including its Gambods devices and chipsets database, its spectrum auction database, its database on networks, technologies and spectrum, private mobile networks, as well as its regular 5G update reports. 2020 saw 5G move to the center stage with many launched services from network operators, and 2021 has seen continued growth for 5G infrastructure deployment and service launches. The charts and statistics here really tell the story. By December 2021, so by this month, 481 operators in 144 countries or territories were investing in 5G. When we talk about investing in 5G, we mean investing in trials and tests, investing in licenses to enable the deployment of 5G services, investing in the deployments themselves or pilot projects, or those that have actually launched services as well. We count all of those as investors. Of those 481, a total of 189 operators in 74 countries or territories have now launched one or more 3GPP compliant 5G services, and in addition 5 soft launches. They're launches that have been announced but as far as we can tell aren't available to customers at this point. Maybe just a select few of chosen ones just to try the service out. Of those 189, 177 had launched 3GPP compliant 5G mobile services, so fully mobile data services that is, the rest of them offering 5G fixed wireless access services alone, although there are many more than the 12 that might imply offering 5G fixed wireless, and I'll come on to that in a minute. It's just that those 12 only offer 5G fixed wireless. If we compare those numbers to where we were at the start of the year, at the end of 2020, 135 operators had launched a 3GPP compliant 5G service. So we've now got 40% more over the course of 12 months. And by way of comparison, although there's no exact overlap between the LTE and 5G data sets, it does mean that the equivalent of nearly a quarter of all LTE operators have now launched 5G services, which is significant. In addition to those that have already fully launched, 57 operators in 46 countries have been catalogued by GSA as actively deploying 5G. So that means they've awarded the contracts, they're sticking the base stations in, getting ready to launch. So we can expect the launch numbers to grow in 2022. And based on current trajectories, it's possible that we'll exceed 200 launch networks by the end of Q1 2022, or if not, certainly quite soon thereafter. And then, of course, there's the next generation of 5G standalone. We're already seeing investments around the world in 5G standalone. GSA is now tracking 98 operators investing in 5G standalone for public networks, and 47 of those are known to be actively deploying 5G standalone technologies. There have also been a few new launches, and we'll be publishing our new market update on 5G standalone next week. So look out for that for the latest statistics. 5G is not, as I mentioned previously, just about fully mobile services. Fixed wireless access has become a key element of the 5G service package. GSA undertakes a twice yearly research project to visit the websites of all known LTE and 5G public network operators to review if they're offering fixed wireless access services based on LTE or 5G, and if so, what their service offers are. Now, the latest round of research was undertaken during November and only just completed, and we collected data about services delivered using indoor and outdoor CPE, and it focuses on fixed wireless access only using LTE or 5G technologies. We don't count fixed wireless access based on other technologies such as WiMAX or proprietary solutions. When we talk about fixed wireless access, we only include services based on a fixed location CPE, so the CPE requiring a mains electricity connection. That doesn't, of course, mean it can't be moved from one office or house to another, but it does mean you can't walk around the street with it. So we don't count dongles and those sorts of things as fixed wireless access devices. We also exclude industrial grade equipment, technology designed for private networks or IoT deployments. But we've seen, nonetheless, looking at the provision of fixed wireless access based on 5G for consumers and businesses, 81 operators that are now marketing services, and that's up more than 84% in 12 months. And I think you'll agree that's quite a tremendous growth. If we look at the way they're packaging those 5G fixed wireless access services, nearly a third of service providers only promote speed-based tariff structures. Just over a third promote volume-based tariff structures, and around 9% offer both. And then there are a small sample that provide other types of tariff structures, maybe based on device subscriptions or that sort of thing. So there's a variety of other different things there. But those trends are quite different from LTE, where volume-based structures dominate. And it's been evolving quite quickly within the 5G market, where volume-based structures were much more prevalent last year. So as operators are bringing 5G fixed wireless on stream, they're promoting the speed benefits that 5G fixed wireless access can offer, and they're reflecting that in their tariff structures to attract customers. If we look at the quoted speeds, for 5G speed data has become more readily available over the last year, and we've now got data on the maximum downlink speeds for 5G fixed wireless access from 53 operators compared with 36 that we could find data for in June 2021. And the quoted peak speeds range from 50 megabits per second up to 4.2 gigabits per second downlink, with just over half of them sitting in the 250 megabits per second to the 1000 megabits per second range. Now, I should emphasize that's not your average or your typical speeds. Those are the headline speeds that are being marketed and offered by operators to attract customers to the service. But I think that the key thing to note here is that fixed wireless access based on 5G is here and now, and operators are pushing it hard. Another big trend I want to mention is the investment in private 5G networks. GSA's recently launched a private mobile database shows there are hundreds of private mobile networks deployed or being deployed around the world. The exact number of existing private mobile network deployments is hard to determine because details are often not made public. So in order to improve information about this market, we're building a database, and we're being assisted in that by executive members who are providing us with confidential information about deployments that doesn't make it into the public domain to help us make sure the database best represents what's going on in the market. So thank you to them for their help. GSA has identified private network deployments based on LTE or 5G on all continents. And in addition, there are private mobile network installations in various offshore locations serving the oil and gas industries as well as on ships. But you can see from the map that many parts of the world are now represented with LTE or 5G private networks. GSA has collected information about 775 organisations now known to be deploying LTE or 5G private networks, or to have been granted a licence suitable for the deployment of a private LTE or 5G network. But we exclude from that count those that have got potentially suitable licenses, but we know are deploying alternative technologies. Within this count, there are 664 organisations catalogued to have deployed or to be deploying private mobile networks based on LTE or 5G, and the rest hold suitable licenses. Amongst those, GSA has been able to classify, the 664 of them and counting, a quarter of them involve the deployment of 5G technology. Given where we were only 2 years ago in terms of global rollout of 5G, I think that really demonstrates the attraction of 5G technology for enabling the transformation of supply chains and manufacturing environments, and the benefits are clearly evident to corporate, public sector and government users. And one of the early innovators in terms of 5G deployment and experimentation is very much the manufacturing sector. We publish a number of reports on private mobile networks throughout the year, and I would encourage you to take a look at those to get a bit more detail, and there'll be at least sort of 4 or 5 of those coming out over the course of next year. Okay, so the availability of spectrum is a critical enabler for 5G services, and that fact is not lost on governments who've been rapidly making more spectrum available in many countries or territories. But another driver for governments is the benefit to the national purse. Spectrum is worth money. You can see from the charts here that the money spent by operators varies widely from country to country. These charts highlight just a small part of the data now available in GSA's spectrum auction database, and they reflect data based on our latest study up to mid-November 2021. GSA has now catalogued C-band auctions or assignments in over 50 countries since the start of 2015. Obviously, many more countries issued C-band spectrum before that for, well, sometimes for LTE services, sometimes for legacy fixed wireless access technologies. But since 2015, they've very much had their eyes on certainly advanced LTE and in many cases 5G services. And the recent average cost of C-band spectrum bought in auctions has come out at about $0.116 per megahertz per pop, but you can see that the figures range quite dramatically between the highest numbers there in the USA and Slovakia down the bottom of the chart on the left that barely registers. By comparison, millimeter wave licenses supporting 5G services rather than millimeter wave supporting backhaul or point-to-point or point-to-multipoint services have now been assigned to operators in 24 countries, and the prices paid for millimetre wave spectrum have been much lower than the prices paid for C-band spectrum to date, with the price per megahertz per pop ranging from just over $0.001 in the US for spectrum at 47 gigahertz to just over $0.009 for spectrum at 37 and 39 gigahertz, also in the US. And the difference in prices between the difference in the cost paid for millimetre wave and C-band is really down to the economics of deployment. It reflects the fact that to achieve the same coverage, you have to deploy many more millimetre wave base stations, and it's not being used as a coverage band. It's being used for capacity in selected areas. GSA's done some analysis of the money spent on all 5G relevant auctions and assignments, irrespective of spectrum band. And during 2021, up to mid-November, when these data sets were compiled, and counting only those auctions and assignments for which GSA has fee data, the total value of spectrum auctions and assignments had already reached $137.5 billion. Now that's a huge increase on the 2020 value of $27.5 billion for the entire year, although the pandemic had a big impact on the number of auctions that took place, especially during the early parts of 2020. Now that figure is a month or so old, and with more auctions having taken place since then, the figure will have edged closer to the $150 billion mark, which I'm sure you will agree is a quite substantial sum of money. And operators have been using all that spectrum that they've been buying. This slide shows how operators around the world are using it, or more specifically, which spectrum assignments they're using for their 5G networks. It's not a straight mapping to auctions. In a number of countries where auctions have yet to take place, we've seen operators launching services using existing spectrum, using dynamic spectrum sharing technology, for example, and sharing spectrum between their LTE and 5G networks. Nonetheless, you can clearly see that C-band spectrum between 3.3 and 4.2 megahertz is way out in front in terms of deployment by operators for 5G services. GSA has documented now 218 operators who are licensed to deploy, who have deployed or are deploying. And over 50 others are investing in test or trials or at the planning stage. In terms of overall activity, millimetre wave at 26-28 gigahertz follows, with 93 licenses, the majority of those in the USA, and 27 deploying networks. But in terms of actual deployments so far, the other spectrum band to watch is 700 megahertz. This is increasingly important with operators using it to quickly expand their 5G network coverage. There are another 24 auctions or assignments of 700 megahertz spectrum expected by the end of 2023. And it's important to note as well that the figures shown on this chart only reflect those 700 megahertz licenses recently awarded for 5G usage. They exclude the many hundreds of 700 megahertz licenses awarded historically around the world in band 28, in the US bands, for usage for LTE, and that spectrum, if refarmed, is potentially available for 5G usage too. In order to make the most of the networks, operators, of course, need devices. But before you can have devices, you need to have chipsets, and there's an increasing choice of chipsets available now for 5G devices. There are 5G modem, and mobile processor or platform products commercially available from HiSilicon, it's a Huawei company, MediaTek, Qualcomm, Samsung, and Unisoc, formerly Spreadtrum, and others, including Apple, are developing 5G chipsets in-house, though they're not in use yet. By December 2021, GSA had identified 47 commercially available 5G mobile processors and platforms. That's up 88% in a year, and 17 commercially available discrete 5G modems, up 70% in a year, from the 5 semiconductor companies mentioned above. In addition, we've identified 2 pre-commercial 5G modems and 7 pre-commercial 5G processors and platforms. So it's quite tremendous growth in the availability of chipsets that can go into the mobile devices that we all want to use. On the back of that growing chipset supply, the number of announced 5G devices continues to rise too, and has now reached more than 1,200, 1,214 to be precise, an increase of 14.5% in the last quarter and of 117% in a year. Of these devices, 832, or 68.5% of them, are understood to be commercially available. So the number of commercial 5G devices has grown by 18% over the last 3 months and by nearly 150% in a year, up from only 335 at the end of December 2020. And we can possibly expect the number of commercially available 5G devices to exceed 1,000 models by the end of the first quarter of 2022 if current trajectories continue. There's a wide choice of CPE. GSA has now catalogued 22 form factors, everything from drones, modules to head-mounted displays, laptops and tablets to robots and hotspots, TVs and cameras. Phones and indoor and outdoor fixed wireless access CPE continue to be the most prevalent 5G devices. There are 596 announced 5G phones catalogued, up more than 100% since the end of last year, and 530 commercially available models. We're tracking over 200 5G fixed wireless access devices now, 128 indoor and 79 outdoor, and the number of announced fixed wireless access CPE models is up more than 90% in a year. And there are now nearly 197 commercially available 5G fixed wireless access CPE devices that we're aware of. Number of suppliers is growing too. GSA has catalogued more than 170 vendors who have announced available or forthcoming 5G devices, and over 120 who've launched commercially available devices. 48 vendors have now produced or announced plans to produce 5G phones, and GSA has identified 40 vendors with commercially available 5G phones. Meanwhile, 71 vendors have announced plans to produce their own indoor or outdoor 5G fixed wireless access CPE devices, and 41 vendors have fixed wireless access CPE devices that are already commercially available. Looking now at spectrum support in those chipsets and devices, 55 of the 5G chipsets that are catalogued as supporting 5G services in sub-6 GHz spectrum, and 36 are catalogued as supporting 5G services using millimeter wave spectrum. Millimeter wave capability in chipsets is improving steadily. Meanwhile, device support is more focused on sub-6 GHz so far. Availability of information about spectrum supported devices is improving as more become commercially available. We've identified some spectrum support information for over 85% of announced devices, and 82.1% of all announced 5G devices are identified as supporting sub-6 gigahertz bands. Sorry, I got my tongue tangled there. And 12.4% of them are understood to support millimeter wave spectrum. Just under 10% are known to support both. Perhaps unsurprising, given the focus of regulators on releasing C-band spectrum for 5G and the fact that C-band spectrum is most used around the world in initial 5G deployments, C-band spectrum is most supported in announced 5G devices, with both sides of the ecosystem working to support each other, closely followed by 2.5 gigahertz. So the bands most known to be supported by all announced 5G devices are N78, N41, and N1, with over 800 devices now identified as supporting band N78. This is a good choice of devices when you're looking at the mainstream bands. GSA is also tracking various capabilities of 5G chipsets and devices, including their support for 5G standalone networks. We mentioned earlier that there's a lot of investment going into 5G standalone now. GSA has catalogued 54 mobile processors or platforms or discrete modems that have been announced as supporting 5G standalone, nearly 85% of all the commercially available 5G chipsets. Half of those are phones, 20% are fixed wireless access CPE and modules. And with fixed wireless, and with 5G standalone networks just beginning to be launched, GSA is already aware of 663 announced devices with claim support for 5G standalone, up 137% from just over 220 at the end of last year. And of those, 461 are already commercially available, up 162% from December 2020. Typically, a software upgrade might be required to enable 5G standalone in a device that's already been pushed out to customers. With 5G standalone, new investment in voice services, seemingly the uninteresting element of mobile services for technology marketeers and commentators in recent years, becomes important again. Voice over new radio will be critical to enable voice services for users, and GSA has recorded 38 commercially available chipsets with stated support for voice over new radio, and 29 mobile processing platforms supporting voice over new radio and 9 discrete modems. Those chipsets are powering 45 announced devices supporting voice over new radio, 24 of them known to be commercially available. Just over half of those are modules, about 38% fixed wireless access CPE, and 7% phones. Okay, so that was a whistle-stop tour of the latest 5G statistics. I'm sure you'll agree that the 5G market has evolved rapidly during 2021, as indeed has GSA's Gambod database, which has been relaunched with new customer interfaces available as a beta service. So I'm going to pass you back to Joe, who's going to give you a whistle-stop tour of what's been going on that front. Over to you, Joe.
Thank you, Simon. Again, very, very interesting stats showing the growth of 5G. As Simon said, we've been looking at how Gambod has grown and its user interface, because when it started in 2009, we were just tracking 3G devices. That's expanded now quite extensively. As you can see, we've got 5 main areas, including networks now, chipsets, operator database, and also very good data on spectrum. What I'm happy to show is a little example of what's happening at the moment, or what the GSA Gambod device network looks like, or the database looks like. So this is, say, the opening screen that you get to from the website. This area is available to all GSA members, but we now have close to 80 companies, regulators, operators, everybody in the ecosystem who are subscribing to get access to the data, because this is the latest information that we've got about what's actually happening in the industry. So you can see that we've got 1,154 5G devices, 20,000 4G devices, lots of vendors, chipsets, and then spectrum. One of the nicest areas I see is in the spectrum side, which was one of our latest additions. So what we're doing here is looking at the type of spectrum that's been announced in being utilized, assigned in different areas of the world. And coming up graphically showing what that looks like. So what you can see when this is loaded, you've got an idea of the spectrum that's allocated. In this case, it's in the high band. You can see what companies. So Austria, for instance, we can see here that this is unpaired spectrum, and then we've got additional information. So you can see in many cases what the operator is and what the frequency range is. But a lot of information around devices. If there's something, so for example, you could search for form factor. So in this case, let's search for an indoor CPE, and then so let's try 5G. CPE, form factor, indoor. We don't have any 5G just there at the moment. But if you're looking at LTE, then there are 516 devices that you can see with various features. You can also look at those in a pie chart, and reduce the number, because it's quite a lot, and see which devices are coming from different vendors around the world. Of this one, Huawei with 28 different devices, Maxcom with 30, for example, and even look at the top 10. And so this information can also be downloaded. You can use this in charts and other information. So lots of filters that can be utilized so you can refine your searches. And for those of you that are already using Gambot, you can also save searches so that you can then go and look at those devices, do those searches on a regular basis without having to re-input all the different filters. So hopefully that's given you an example of what we're doing. And so hopefully that's something that will be useful to people in the different areas of their business going forward. Over back to you now then, Richard.
Great, thanks very much. And Simon, just a couple of questions on the data itself that you've shared today, which would be good just to dig into. Question on chipsets. Do we see, or are we tracking yet any UR/LLC chipsets on the market?
Good question. We're keeping an eye out for them. I haven't spotted any yet that are commercially available. That's not to say they're not there. We don't always get visibility of all the capabilities of the chipsets. Sometimes, depending on the vendor, the information may be quite scant. It is something we'll be keeping an eye out for, but not at the moment. Very
good, thanks. And a question on definitions, which we quite often get. How does GSA define device? Since of questions, the sort of the 663 5G SA devices sounds.
Good question. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so we're focused there on end user devices, so phones, dongles, that sort of thing. There's a little bit of crossover with residential small cells, femto cells. We do count those, and we do count, enterprise equipment, but it's got to be for and installed by the end user, and it's got to be it's not intended to be installed within something else, unless it's a module. So we do count modules within the devices as well. You can get them as a standalone thing, and then obviously there's chipsets which we count separately in our database, but we don't count any infrastructure side equipment.
Very good. And a question about status of release 16 in the market in terms of networks and devices. Is that something that we're seeing and tracking much of?
At the moment, operators are not talking about their support for release 16. It will be something that I'm sure GSA will keep an eye on going forward. We are starting to see the odd chipset state support for release 16, and I have seen some devices state that they will support release 16, but the information is still really rather scant, so we're not reporting on that at this stage.
Excellent stuff. Thank you. And I guess maybe a couple more. Do you have any information on support of 5G NRU?
Okay, so again, that's something that we've been keeping an eye on. Use of unlicensed spectrum for 5G. I'm not aware of any operators that have implemented it at this stage, and we're not seeing devices that are promoting their capability to use it. So we're still at very early stages of that technology.
Excellent stuff. And I'm conscious of time. We're very much up against our half an hour. We try to respect people's time as best we can. So I'll sort of say thank you for everybody for sharing your questions. Then again, just to repeat the slides, you can download them now. You should see a little icon at the top of the screen with a little cloud and a download button. You can download the PDF now. You'll also get a link to the recording and the PDF to download from the GSA website, which will be in your inbox immediately after this webinar concludes. all the data you've seen today, as Joe and Simon have explained, is taken from GSA's Gambod database. So it's available to all employees of GSA executive and member companies and to GSA associates who subscribe to the service. Our next event is on the 14th of January and is a GSA Insights webinar. So a longer form event looking at turning 5G millimeter wave into reality in Asia Pacific. For that event, we'll be bringing together panels of operators from around the world and regulators from across the Asia Pac region to share their insights and experiences on millimeter wave for 5G. For the latest updates on all the GSA research and activities, please do follow GSA on our social channels. You'll find us on Twitter, LinkedIn, WeChat and Weibo. And if you visit gsacom.com, you'll be able to subscribe to our weekly Research Digest email and also sign up to new report notifications. On behalf of Joe, Simon and the whole GSA team, all that really remains is for me to say thank you again for joining us and to wish you a happy, healthy and prosperous holidays and new year. Many thanks.